Shadow and Light in the Devi Mahatmya. Well, as most of you may well be aware, the Devi Mahatmya is a significant text insofar, significant in the history of Indian religions insofar as it is the first time to our knowledge that we see Trojan horsed into the Brahmanic fold, into the orthodoxy, this idea of a great goddess figure. It is 13 chapters. It comprises, it's couched in the Markandeya Purana, specifically in the Manvantara section of the Markandeya Purana. That'll become somewhat significant later in the talk. In addition to being a fantastic narrative, I'm so glad that many of you love story. And by the way, I quite enjoyed Seema's presentation just now. In addition to it being wonderful literature, it has a vibrant life chanted as liturgy for ritual, particularly at Navaratri, and for sadhakas, upasakas, for devotees throughout the year as well. I think it's safe to say it's a monumental moment in the history of Indian religions. Thomas Coburn has exhaustively documented the extent to which the epithets, for example, of the goddess or goddesses in the Devi Mahatmya draw from leverage tradition, right? For a text so radically different to succeed in taking hold. First, I think we can all suspect that goddess worship was just so popular that they had to craft a Sanskrit text for the Devi. But for it to take hold, really, it does a wonderful job of leveraging all that came before in that syncretic fashion. Indic soil is very syncretic, as we all well know. You see the absorption of various deities, Vedic deities. And more apropos for this talk, we see the reworking, the innovation, maybe even subversion of Upanishadic ideology, of core Hindu philosophical concepts, particularly Maya and Prakriti. These are not seen in the same way as obstructions to the divine. They are themselves divine in this text. So this is an important mythic moment in the history of Indian religions, without question. And as we've touched on earlier, the power of narrative cannot be underestimated or understated. The power of narrative to encode ideology, values, to encode and inculcate, preserve and transmit across time, to teach you when you least expect it. Such is the power of myth, narrative. And there is a symbiosis, perhaps, of between the narratives that are most long-lived or most cherished, and the values they preserve. Right, the narratives preserve the very same values, right, that we want to continue teaching throughout time. Okay, so my first book was The Goddess and the King in Indian Myth, and in that monograph. What I do is I start off with this question of why the Devi Mahatmya is framed by a forced encounter between an ascetic and an exiled king. And of course, this is a common narrative trope. So in understanding its role in the Devi Mahatmya, I endeavor to understand a thing or two about that trope itself. Now, for any of you who are looking at the Devi Mahatmya, apparently very few people are. There's now an Oxford Bibliographies in Hinduism entry. And the essential argument in the book, publications can be quite expensive, is actually available in my dissertation, which online, or in the Safeguard of Sovereignty from the 16th World Sanskrit Conference proceedings. Also, I'm going to gloss over strategy, how I read texts, theory, all that. We can talk about that in discussion, perhaps. I'm going to focus more on the content today, but there are a couple of relatively new publications, one in the Journal of Dharma Studies and the other in Religions of South Asia. That talk about synchronic strategy. How do we read texts such as the Devi Mahatmya, which are diachronically produced without question, which feature frames within frames and various tropes? How do we read them as narrative wholes? Should we even read them as narrative wholes? Right. So for those interested in that dimension, there we are. Now, There is a forthcoming publication. This is the most pertinent to the work that I'm presenting today. It's in a book, a Routledge publication called Jung's Shadow Concept. So I'm talking a little bit about the role of shadow, occlusion of consciousness in the Devi Mahatmya. And what I was going to do is present a version of this that is more geared towards specialists, one that I hope to publish later in the year. But actually, what I'm going to do instead is engage the very data and the very premise of this, so that you can be, invited into my study, and I can share with you my drawing board. And perhaps if you're so amenable, you can help me think through this and think along these lines. Some of the images I use in today's presentation are from this wonderful open access picture book of the Devi Mahatmya, which features 56 Kangra paintings from circa 1810. They're lovely. So the Devi Mahatmya is a tripartite text, right? There are 3 episodes which showcase, feature the Mahatmya of the Devi, right? So I've just laid it out here, just for the sake of thinking along with me and locating where we are in the text. Okay, there are these 3 episodes of various lengths. Actually, one thing I theorize is that each episode is 3 times the previous episode to show the manifestation, to show the Maya of the Devi. And each episode has more characters than the one before as well. So 1 chapter for episode 1, 3 chapters for episode 2, and 3 times 3 is, you got it, 9 chapters for episode 3. What I do in my research is I focus on the frame, because part of my way of being with these texts is thinking of the frame as the key tool to how tradition invites us to read the text. Right, the magnifying glass. The Devi Mahatmya is not, as been said by other scholars, a flimsy frame. It's actually a magnifying glass whereby it shows us how the text wants to be read. And one of the things I discovered in this journey is that the Devi Mahatmya is structured as a ring composition. It has a chiastic structure. There are a number of scholars who have talked about this with Sanskrit Narrative as well. I primarily rely on the work of Mary Douglas. But anyhow, these 5 parts, these episodes, the frame and episode 1 are actually in the same chapter. So it's to use Coburn's expression, it's telegraphically brief for the frame, but it's so important for an understanding of the text. So the opening frame has a corollary at the end, the closing frame. The episode 1 mirrors episode 3, pardon me, and episode 2 is central thematic, central structurally. It's what's called in the language of ring composition, the midturn of the text. And so A and A prime, the opening and closing frame, they parallel each other. That'll be the case for almost any Sanskrit narrative, in that the frame that's opened is closed at the end of the exposition. And the themes therein parallel each other. Similarly, the themes in episode 2, in episode 1 and episode 3 parallel each other. And episode 2, the center of the text, is unique. So in this first parallelism with the opening of frames, I'll tell you a bit of the story in a moment, but maybe it'll be good to have this in your mind. We have the loss of royal power, an exiled king, and delusion, right? They're both, he and his merchant companion are deluded. In the closing frame, we have the restoration of royal power and the restoration of awareness, right? These 2 themes pervade the frame. They also pervade episode 1 and 3. Episode 2, I've got some slides if you'd like. We can touch on it in the Q&A. But episode 2 is probably Durga Devi's most famous iconographic moment. It is where she slays the buffalo demon, right? Very, very famous scene. Now, this parallelism is the one that I want to turn to for this talk. It's the parallelism between episodes 1 and 3. In particular, I want to focus on the opening. I'm going to skip over this idea of the Dharmic double helix, but basically it's just this idea that the goddess grants both liberation and sovereignty insofar as she is leveraging these two legacies in the language of Mahabharata, Parvati and Nivriti, this age-old tension of the household and renouncer. It's not too crucial for this talk, but it's another piece that came out of the dissertation in the first book and that I continue talking about in the second book. Now, let me share some story with you, because what I want to do is share the text with you and have us read it together. And you can tell me if I'm off my rocker, or if I'm onto something, or if you've seen this somewhere else or not. But what I'm really fascinated with, exceedingly, my work so far is focused on the theme of kingship, of royal power in the Devi Mahatmya, which is central. But really, there's so much to be said about the innovative way that the text regards Maya. This perhaps subversive notion that Maya is divine, Prakriti is divine, right? That they're aspects of the supreme ontological force, this feminine force known as the Devi. It's story time, so get comfortable. I'll read a little bit from a forthcoming book. The first two are scholarly works. This is not a scholarly work. It is insofar as I retell vignettes, 50 vignettes from the epics and the Puranas, but it's for practitioners, primarily in the yoga world. But nevertheless, the story might be of interest to you. I actually use the frame story for BHADRASANA, throne pose. Once there was a wise and noble king named Surata, who treated his subjects as his own kith and kin. The kingdom prospered under his rule, until power-thirsty lords from adjoining lands began to usurp his domain. He retreated to his capital city, but even there he was robbed of his dominion through the plotting of wicked ministers. Stripped of his power, beside himself with grief, he took to his horse and entered the Gahanam Vanam, the deep dark forest, to process what had happened. While there, he came across the hermitage of the great sage Medhas. So steeped in the principles of truth and compassion was the sage, that the wild beasts of the forest were tamed by his very presence. And so the king found great solace in the hermitage, enjoying the peace there and the melodious chanting of the sage and his students. Yet after some time, despair crept back into his mind. The king was lamenting to himself in the vicinity of the ashrama. Dejected, he wandered and wondered after the welfare of his citizens, his capital city, his prized elephant, his treasury, and all else that he had loved and now lost. Right then, a lone merchant crossed his path, looking equally demoralized. The king greeted the merchant with kindness, asking after his woes. The merchant said that his own family had stolen his great wealth and cast him out of his home to wander the earth as a beggar. Can you imagine that? But I can't help but wonder, concluded the merchant, how my wife and sons are keeping. Are they eating properly? Are they doing their homework? Are how are they faring? The merchant sighed in despair again and again, concerned for the welfare of his loved ones. What the heck's the matter with you, says the king. You're concerned about these people who have robbed you and cast you out? I know. I can't help it. Well, really, said the king, we're not so different. I was just lamenting myself before you came along. Misery loves company, but we're the blind leading the blind. I'm upset about power I don't have. You're upset about money you don't have anymore. But that sage made this. He's cool as a cucumber. Let's approach the sage and gain some teachings. And so the sage relays to them the Devi Mahatmya, right? I'll show you in more detail the verses that the sage says for the purposes of this talk. And then after they hear the Devi Mahatmya, everything from halfway through chapter 1 to the end of chapter 12, here comes the beginning of the final chapter 13, which consists of 17 or 18 verses, depending on how you count it. The merchant and the king took leave of the wise sage, expressing their gratitude for his teachings. They made their way to riverbank and crafted a clay icon of the goddess, which they consecrated with Sanskrit mantras. They then worshipped her day and night with water, incense, fruit, flowers, and flame. And you're all old enough to know this, they sprinkled the blood of their own limbs as well. I didn't put that detail here. For 3 long years, they worshipped her, chanting her sacred hymns, meditating on her glories. And she appears, and she's so happy. Throughout the text, she's a giver of boons. So in the frame, right, this turns the reader's attention or the hearer's attention to how might one apply these glories. right? So they remember and recite the glories of the goddess in the frame, and she appears, and she's so pleased. She says, whatever you want, I'll give you each a boon. And the merchant said, I want knowledge that takes you beyond I-ness and minus. I want moksha, essentially. And she grants it. And the king says, I want my kingdom back. And what does she do? Chastise him because he didn't pay enough attention at those OCHS online videos or the YouTube channels. The Swamis he didn't pay attention, like he doesn't understand, he's still attached. No, she rewards him. She says, in 3 days' time, you'll confront your enemies, and through my grace, you'll be victorious and regain your throne, O king. It will be yours for the rest of your days. And once you have completed this incarnation, I'll exalt you to be reborn as Lord of an age, the next Manu. You will be Savarni in the next Manvantara, reborn as the son of Surya, the sun. Delighted, they prostrated before her, singing her praises as she vanished. And so it came to pass that by the grace of the goddess, a merchant gained spiritual liberation, and a deposed king not only regained his throne, but was rewarded for his care for the world and became Manu of the next age. Okay. The frame story really is a story it's a tale of two siddhis. Right? What do they call the goddess? Bhukti Mukti Padayini. It showcases the extent to which, for the goddess to be supreme power, she must represent the power whereby one is liberated, and the power which binds us to the world and whereby one achieves in the world. To be the single font of power, to mythologize and personify all of existence, the power of all things, she has to do both. In one fell swoop, she has to give voice to the Dharmic double helix with her dual booning of these two heroes, seeking acclaim in inner and outer worlds alike. What I want to do, because this is the crowd that it is, I want to look at the text with you together. And I want us to interrogate this idea. Is it radical? Is it radical what this text is doing to Maya? Have you seen this before? Right? So the text begins, and one principle in the back of my brain is the very beginning is extremely important. Even if you have a list of things, like a list of virtues or a list of whatever Shastra, whatever Itihasa you're looking at, the first and the last. This is actually a principle used in Sampradaya as well, but it's clear, it becomes clear even when you're looking at the world within the text, right? Savarni. This is Markandeya speaking. Markandeya speaking was to Kraushtiki, Jaimini. Jaimini, the student of Vyasa, comes knocking on Markandeya's door at the beginning of the Markandeya Purana, and Markandeya is teaching him. So this is the middle of the Manvantara section. We've just finished the last seven. We're in the current seventh epoch, right? Vaivasvata. And they've just finished talking about the first seven, and then this is the beginning of the next seven, the eighth one. And this is where the Devi Mahatmya exists, couched right in the middle of the Manvantara section of the Markandeya Purana. So he's about to tell them about the next Manu, who, as we just learned, will be reborn thanks to the grace of the goddess. So the whole Devi Mahatmya is the backstory of how he became a Manu. And this is important without question. Savarni Suritanayo Yo Manu Kateteshtama. Now, Savarni is the son of the sun, will become Lord of the next age. Here as I relay his rise at length. By the way, these translations are mine. They're more or less direct translations. Here as I relay at length how by the grace of Mahamaya, this is how she's introduced. Mahamaya, not Mahadevi, not one of her many epithets, which would definitely fit the prosodic requirements of this verse, right? Mahamaya. By the grace of Mahamaya. Mahamaya is a favorable thing. Mahamaya is something that blesses. So this is crucial. From the mouth of Markandeya, the very first time we hear about her existence, she's called Mahamaya. Mahamaya Anubhavena, right? And then he tells the story of the king Chaitra, King Sudata, born in the line of Chaitra. He continues the evil princes usurping his territories, him retreating to the forest, right? Okay. He soon encounters the ashram of Medus, best of sages, whose hospice was graced with devout disciples, and once wild beasts made tame. Honored there by the exalted sage, the king stayed on for some time, wandering hither and thither about the ashram as he pleased. With afflicted mind, he reflected thus, what of my ancestral city, guarded for generations, now lost to me? Is it being justly governed by those misguided subjects of mine? And what about my prized elephant, ever valorous, ever virile? What treatment does he meet, having fallen into enemy hands? Okay, then along comes the merchant. We can look at this more closely if any of you have an interest. So the merchant's name is Samadhi. How much more archetypal can you get? Samadhi Onama by Shoham. He represents ascetic ideology. He represents the pursuit of moksha. That's what he gets in the end. I want to take us to where they go and they approach the sage. Then the merchant Samadhi and Suda, the best of kings, together approached the sage. The merchant and king sat near him and told their wretched tales, having paid respect worthy of so exalted a sage. Bhagavan, blessed one, began the king, I wish to ask you something, do tell. My mind has gone to grief unrestrained, my thoughts run free. Though I know better, I'm selfishly attached to a lost kingdom, as if it were still my own. How could this be, O best of sages? And this merchant here, spurned by his sons and wife, abandoned by his household, forsaken by his own people. Similarly, he retains affection for his own kith and kin. Gripped by these attachments, though we see their flaws, we are thus utterly miserable. Look, we went to Ivy League schools. We took the best online courses. We know these teachings. We've read the Bhagavad Gita, but we're just so attached. This is the problem. You know, what's going on here? Why are we so blind? So the sage says, just have a sip of your soy chai latte and listen up, okay? Listen, king. All we creatures in this phenomenal world, right? All of us, you know, gripped by sense perceptions, we're all blind. Some of us are blind by day, some by night, some see equally by day and night. Humans are not alone in this knowledge, this sensory knowledge tied to the phenomenal world. Like the birds and beasts, this is what we're like, right? We're all alike in this capacity. We're all like these birds overhead flying all day to feed their young, you know, deluded into thinking their offspring will stay with them, but they won't. Like this, like these birds and beasts, like this, we are all hurled into the whirlpool of delusion by the power of Mahamaya. Here he is again. Just when you think he's talking about a philosophical concept, by the power of Mahamaya. He's not talking about a philosophical concept. This is a proper noun in this case. By the power of Mahamaya, she who comprises this transitory world. Be not so surprised. She deludes the world. She's the very same Mahamaya who's Vishnu's sleep. So it's a mythologization. It's a personification of the sleep of Vishnu. And yet it's not construed as negative or inert in this case. The blessed goddess Mahamaya forcefully seizes the minds of even the wise, drawing them deep into delusion's lair. She manifests as this entire universe. All that moves and does not move, she graciously grants boons for the liberation of souls. She graciously grants boons for the liberation of souls. She is herself supreme, eternal truth that grants liberation from bondage to mundane life. So Mahamaya, the same force that is deluding everyone, is the same force that is liberating everyone. What does this mean? So, yeah, she's sovereign of sovereigns. She's lady of lords. She's the queen of kings. Now, he mentions kingship. That's the hook. Now the king is like, okay, I'm hooked. Who is this Mahamaya? How did she rise? What are her feats? O Dvija. Whatever her power, whatever her form, whatever her origin, I want to know the greatness of the goddess. I want to know the Devi Mahatmya. And so some would say the Devi Mahatmya begins here. But everything that came before is crucial to understanding the application of the greatness of the goddess. Okay. So the sage agrees to tell how she variously manifests, though eternal, She's born into the world. So what he's saying is, I'm going to tell you occasions of how she manifests, but she's eternal. She's beyond time and space. She just, she appears for a purpose. Okay. He's the first tale, very brief but very powerful. He points to Vishnu reclining on a serpent couch after the last pralaya. I'm sure you're all aware of this mythic motif. And Vishnu enters into his yogic sleep, who itself is Mahamaya. The great goddess is Vishnu's yogic sleep. Then suddenly two wretched demons, Madhu and Kaitaba, arose from the dirt of Vishnu's ears, intent on destroying Brahma, of course, in the nabi of Vishnu. Of course, I'm sure you all know this, the Brahma seated in the lotus navel, emanating from Vishnu's navel. Two demons emerge, intent on destroying the creator. Brahma, lord of creatures, abiding in the divine lotus in Vishnu's navel, spotted the two fierce demons and spotted too the sleeping Vishnu. So with single pointed focus, for the sake of awakening Vishnu, Brahma hymned Yoganidra, abiding in Vishnu's eyes. So this is the creation. Creation has yet to begin. Demons are already there and the Devi is already there. Okay. The creator God is calling upon a force beyond even the great gods of Hinduism, the Trimurti, right? The resplendent Lord extolled Vishnu's blessed sleep as the supreme incomparable queen of the universe, support of the world, the source of its maintenance and destruction. And then comes forth Brahma's hymn, one of the four hymns in the Devi Mahatmyam called the Brahma Stuti. I'll share a couple of lines from it. This is not so important. She's everything. Okay, this is where you start seeing the theology, the vision that she is supreme. She's beyond even the gods. She's what causes them to become embodied in the first place. She's the power they all share, and yet she's Prakriti, and yet she's Maya. She's she's Mahamaya and Mahavidya. Right. She's everything that exists and doesn't exist. Imagine that. Okay. So what does Brahma say at the end of his hymn? At this point, I've switched over to Coburn's translation. I'm currently working on translating the hymns and debating whether or not a new translation is needed. I've been humming and hawing for 3 months. We can talk about that. So henceforth it's Coburn. Okay. May you praised in this fashion, says Brahma to the Devi, with your superior powers, confuse those two unassailable asuras, Madhu and Kaitaba. He doesn't say destroy them. He doesn't say help Vishnu destroy them. She's a salvific force throughout. She's a rescuer. She's powerful. He even hails her as having weapons in this hymn. What is her weapon? Which weapon of hers does he wish her to discharge in this moment? Delusion, occlusion of light. Confuse and confound them. Wield that force of Maya for the good of the world. So, praised, she removes atomasi, she removes her grasp from Vishnu's limbs, his eyes, his heart, his nose, his breast. And she emerges in the body of Vishnu. I think this is very important, actually. In every single episode, she comes out of the body of other beings. Emphasis on embodiment, without question. But, she manifests, and Vishnu goes to war with the demons. He battles them, and they're swirling around and around in the cosmic ocean for 5,000 years. And so she intervenes. This obviously isn't working. What does she do? Does she give Vishnu more weapons? Does she give him a special boon? Does she enter the battle herself? Nope. She dispenses the missile of Mahamaya. She deludes the demons, and power is delusive in the wrong hands. So she's also power. So the demons mistake her power for their own, and they're deluded, intoxicated by their excess might. Deluded by Mahamaya, they're so deluded, so overconfident. They say, "Oh, you wretched god, you're nothing. We're going to give you a boon. We're so powerful. Whatever boon you want." That Vishnu's seeing clearly because Maya has been released. He's been released from the grasp of Mahamaya. And he says, "Okay, well, I just want to be able to butcher the two of you. That's my boon." And they still fancy themselves smart because of the spell of Mahamaya. We have been deceived. And having seen the entire universe to consist of solely of water, the two of them addressed the lotus-eyed Vishnu. We are delighted by this battle with you. We're proud to die at your hands. Slay us in a place where the earth is not flooded with water. They think themselves smart. But of course, we all know how this ends. Having said so be it, the blessed one who carries conch, discus, club, put the two of them on his lap and cut off their heads with his discus. And this is how, said the sage to the king, when praised by Brahma, the goddess came into being. Hear again of the majesty of this goddess. I will tell it to you. Now, episode 2, I'm not going to worry too much about sharing that with you. And we can go into that. That's crucial for the kingship argument that I make in a couple of my publications. But what I want to do is maybe just take us to the closing frame so we could discuss this vision together of what I perceive in the Devi Mahatmya. The power of Mahamaya is not only featured in episode 1, it's also featured heavily in episode 3. We could perhaps talk about that as well. There is a moment she manifests being after being because the demons just, can't take a hint and they keep trying to drag her by her hair. So she'll be the wife of their demonic overlord and overlords, Shumba Nishumba. And there's this powerful scene. This in episode 3 is where she manifests the Saptamatrikas, manifests Kali. So there's all kinds of beings that emerge in episode 3. And it's quite telling. This kind of Mayic motif that at some point she basically confronts Shumba himself. Everyone else is destroyed. Okay, and Shumba says, you rely on the might of others. That's how you win, Durga. He calls her Durga in this context, and she's like, "Listen, fool." Well, fool is a bit of a gloss. I alone exist here in the world. What second other than me is there? O wicked one, behold, these my manifestations of power entering back into me. On guard. And of course, all of the Saptamatrikas and Kali are reabsorbed back into the body of Durga or Devi. And of course, she reigns supreme. It's a cataclysmic battle. So this principle is echoed in episode 3. Okay, but I just want to bring it home. I just want to turn to the closing frame. All the 3 episodes have elapsed. The seer concluded, thus have I related to you, O king, the Devi Mahatmya. Devi Mahatmyam Uttamam. Such is the power of the goddess who supports this entire universe. Such is how truth is fashioned by the goddess who deludes even the gods. And he returns. After sharing the magnanimity, the martial power, the supremacy, he returns to this delusion, not in a denigrating way. Right? He's saying, others like you are deluded, and so will others be deluded in future. Take refuge in her, because she is the sovereign of sovereigns. When invoked, she grants enjoyment, heaven, and even liberation. Upon hearing these words, the king paid homage to the illustrious sage, weary with concern, longing for his lost kingdom. He immediately went forth to practice austerities along with his merchant companion. The king and the merchant were intent on receiving a vision of the mother. So they settled down along a riverbank, bhakti, idiom of bhakti without question, along a riverbank to practice great austerities, reciting the supreme hymn to the goddess. All the while, they fashioned an earthen image along the riverbank, through which they worshipped the goddess with flowers, incense, fire, water. They sometimes severely restricted their diet and sometimes fasted completely. They even made offerings sprinkled with the blood of their own limbs. With minds composed, their thoughts focused on the Devi. What happens? For 3 long years, they worshipped her in this austere manner. Right? And she manifests delighted, paritushta, right? Receive from me all that you seek, O king, and you as well, O merchant. Pleased by your penance, I will bestow it now. Then the king wished for the return of his kingdom. He doesn't want to escape Maya. He wants to improve his lot in Maya. His enemy is overthrown along with a kingdom that would not perish even in another lifetime. But the wise merchant, disheartened by the cares of the world, wished for that supreme insight which severs attachments to I-ness and minus. O king, said the goddess, in just a few days you shall reclaim your throne, conquering your enemies. It will be yours forever and ever. Amen. Then in your next life, you shall receive a birth from the sun god Vivasvan, where you will become the Manusavarni, lord over the next age. And turn to camera 2. O best of merchants, I too grant you the boon you seek so earnestly. I'll give you the insight that leads to human perfection. Having granted each his desired boon, the goddess vanished, as the merchant and king elated devoutly sung her praises. And then the very end of the frame, it latches into the Manvantara section of the Markandeya Purana. Thus, receiving a boon from the goddess, Surata, best of rulers, will receive another birth from the sun and will become Savarani, Manu of the next age. There's much to be said about the vision that we see in the Devi Mahatmya and how monumental it is in terms of crafting in Sanskrit Brahmanism this idea, this entity of the great goddess. I'll just touch very briefly on a couple of themes, and then I'll get to the most important one. But certainly throughout the text, she will variously represent supremacy, without question, power, all sorts of power, physical power, martial power, empowerment, power used to protect the imperiled, protection, she protects throughout, and the sine qua non of the Indian king is the power to protect, the duty to protect, and so she's sovereign throughout. Right? This is very important. This is more related to the royal ideology of the Devi Mahatmya. Motherhood is another important theme, but more to the point of what I want to share, I'm sharing some data with you in hopes that you can engage the text with me and also leverage all of your various brilliant brains and expertises to tell me if this is as novel as I think it is. We're all very aware of classical Hinduism, right? The six orthodox schools of Hinduism, which all posit a cyclical existence that is problematic, that needs to be overcome, transmuted perhaps, or transcended. And yet in this text, the body of the goddess, the supreme, the ultimate divine force, is Maya, is Shakti, is Prakriti, is Karma, is Samsara. This seems to me a very important inversion, maybe even subversion of Upanishadic thought, broadly speaking. In this text, we see not only the absorption of tradition and the absorption of various philosophical concepts, but we see, to my mind, something fairly radical. And that's more of a question than a conclusion. I would love some contribution and engagement in terms of how you may view what I'm presenting you about the role of Maya in the text, and really occlusion as being an aspect of the divine. That the ignorance and the Maya and the occlusion is means whereby the divine does what it needs to do for the welfare of the world or the benefit of an individual. Right. So with that, I think I'll conclude today's talk. Thank you so much. And it was a great pleasure to be asked to present today. Had a fantastic conversation with Karen and the various presenters on the podcast. So I look forward to discussing these ideas with you. Thank you very much.